Welcome to episode 137 of the Half Point Per podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie, who rumor has it has a Dunkin' Donuts drink named after him, and our producer, Johnny Fan. Johnny, how's it going?
Oh man, just happy to be here.
The
Just
Chiefs
so
won the
happy.
Super Bowl since we've talked last.
We did. Congrats to us and
Yes.
all of our features that hit and our the winnings are now gone. But congrats to us.
This podcast is slanderous and libelous.
We'll let the audience decide for themselves. Go look up Dunkin' Donuts drink today, and you can decide. Just decide with this fact in mind. Dalton is 2 inches shorter than me, at least.
I am the American average for height. No
Yeah,
more.
When you have
no
to
less.
pull that stat up, that's you lost us.
Facts are facts.
Before we leave the topic of the Super Bowl and the playoffs, I did go back. I almost forgot that we even did this because it's been so long. I went back and looked at our straight up and against the spread picks. It was another pretty good year, guys. Gotta say, straight up, Johnny and Dalton both 10-3. I was 9-4 against the spread. Johnny and I 10-3. Dalton 7-6. Which, I mean, if the worst we're doing is 7-6, we're still making money. We're still in the positive.
There was no grass this year that threw me off, but there were other inclement factors.
Believing in Joe Flacco was one of them.
That would be one of them. I don't know what's worse, is believing Bermuda grass would change the play, or Joe Flacco wasn't going to throw 2 pick sixes.
Oh man, speaking of belief and believing crazy things, that is what free agency will do to a man, both in fantasy football land and just in real life, hoping and praying a certain team that you cheer for signs a wide receiver. And we have a lot of guys who have changed teams since we last talked, Dalton. We're not going to go through all of them. We're a week plus past the first wave at this point. If you're listening, you know where all of these guys went. We're going to go through, Dalton and I. We've got 5 winners, 5 losers from the first wave of free agent signings. Dalton, do you want to start with the positive side or the negative side?
Let's start this off light, because I think there's been a lot more losses this free agency than wins so far.
So we're starting off with the winners?
Yes.
Okay, let's start with one that I'm pretty sure is overlap on our list then, and that is Drake London, and that is because Kirk Cousins, Mr. You Like That, is heading to the Atlanta Falcons for just an absolute boatload of money. And, I think a lot of people will rightfully say that every skill position player is a winner in Atlanta for this, which I think is true. Now, I believe it to varying degrees for different guys. Like, I still have hope for Pitts. I don't know if I believe in Pitts. Obviously, Bijan is a winner, but the biggest winner, just by virtue of he has to catch passes from the quarterback, and he's the best pass catcher on this team, it's got to be Drake London in my mind. I'm trying to remember, Dalton, did you just have Drake London, or were you Falcons weapons?
No, I've been pretty lockstep agreement with you. I think we know factually Drake London is better than what he's performed in fantasy. I think there's still questions out there for Kyle Pitts, and I think Bijan, even despite everything, was still right where we had him last year. So I'm sure he'll have a better season, but I'm not going to go crazy on Kirk Cousins' value add to Bijan. I think Drake London is the biggest riser here, and by a pretty substantial margin.
Yeah, I mean, he goes from probably a bottom 2 quarterback situation in the league, like one of the 2, like you have whatever the Steelers quarterback situation was last year. You have the Jets, and like the Falcons are right there, probably with both of those teams as far as just how bad a quarterback play they had. Now, what I will say, I'll bring this back to Drake London being awesome in a minute. What I will say is I'm kind of bummed out by this, but I kind of think I'm going to have to, while being happy for Drake London and increasing his value, I think people are going to go a little bit too far with this, just with some early stuff that I've seen, some early ranks where he's been ahead of guys that I'm just not quite sure of. Even if Cousins is an upgrade, which he is, mean, we got to remember this guy is coming off a torn Achilles. He's 35. He's not 40 like Aaron Rodgers, but I think Tom Brady has kind of trained us to think of 35 as not that old. Quarterbacks, 35 is pretty old for a quarterback, especially one that's not an all-time great. Kirk Cousins is a good NFL quarterback. He is not Aaron Rodgers. He is not Tom Brady. I think we just have to have that potential downside in mind. Now, even in the worst case scenario, do I think he still is in a better spot with Kirk Cousins at quarterback? Yes, I 100% do. But I do think we just have to keep that potential downside in mind when we put Drake London at like wide receiver 8, because I've seen him in those kinds of ranges. I don't know if you have thoughts on that before we just talk about London himself for a minute here.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be concern about potential fall off from Kirk Cousins. I'm still going to be aggressive with him. Wide receiver 8's too aggressive, but just to like give an idea of the play Drake London was dealing with, Desmond Ridder and Heineke over the last 2 seasons were both top 10 in uncatchable targets. Last season, Kirk Cousins had the 4th lowest rate of uncatchable targets.
And obviously Marcus Mariota, the year before that, was in that same category.
And then you just throw in Zach Robinson, the offensive coordinator coming out of the Los Angeles Rams. It's going to be a more efficient passing offense that utilizes the actual weapons in the offense and not the ancillary pieces. So those are exciting for me. I'm sure.
Well, and they have Darnell Mooney, who his presence should help, because like you can't just put everybody on Drake London now.
Yes.
Like you at least have another receiver who is somewhat proven in the NFL.
Yeah, and in way too early ADP, Drake London is sitting at wide receiver 27 between Amari Cooper and T. Higgins, which personally I think it's a little low for him.
Yeah, that I don't even know. Like, I don't even know how to. Is that on Underdog? Is that where that's at right now?
Yeah. Well, I'm pulling it from Fantasy Pros, but Underdog's really the only place ADP is being generated right now.
Yeah, I don't even know how much I can really buy that at this point. Obviously, if he's in that range, yeah, that's a home run. I just think I saw somebody playing a name game with him the other day, and the guys that he was being named ahead of, I was like, okay, so it sounds like you have him as like wide receiver 10, which frightens me a little bit.
Let's play a fun game. These are the wide receivers 15, 16, and 17.
Okay.
We'll include 14. We'll include all the way up to 13.
Okay.
Deebo Samuel or Drake London?
I'll go Deebo still.
Nico Collins or Drake London?
Nico Collins.
Brandon Ayuk.
I'd have Ayuk ahead of both those other two as well.
Rashee Rice.
I'd take him over Rice.
Keenan Allen.
I'd take him over Keenan Allen. Talk about him later.
And then Marvin Harrison Jr., who's at 18 right now.
I'll take him over a guy who I've yet to see play and don't know where he's playing.
Okay, I think lockstep. I might take him over Deebo, but not Ayuk. But yeah, I mean, it slots him in a high end, like the highest end of wide receiver 2 upside, I think is where he really lands in my opinion.
Yeah, and you sent this stat to me the other day. This is a guy, Drake London, who last year targets per route run. Only 10 receivers in the NFL had higher than 25% last year. Drake London was 4th among that group. I think it was Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Cooper Kupp maybe were ahead of him. Maybe Amon-Ra was right behind him. But regardless, in the neighborhood of elite separator, elite receiver. And I really think that is one thing people don't understand about him, is he's a really good separator just because he's big and doesn't do it in a quick twitch, flashy way like a Garrett Wilson. People think he can't separate. I think people still just underrate the player a little bit here with Drake London.
Yeah, I think so too. He's just been in such a bad situation, but I think he's the best offensive weapon on that team.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Okay, you can start with your second winner here.
I think Deontay Johnson is a pretty clear winner.
So I had Bryce Young as a winner, and before I knew yours, one of my bullet points was, does this help or hurt Deontay's value? And I'm with you that I think this helps it.
So it was pretty clear last season the biggest issue there were a lot of issues in Carolina, but one of the biggest was, first of all, the offensive line let out a lot of pressures that led to a lot of quick throwaways from Bryce Young. And then secondly, their wide receivers could not separate. But it does help to go back and look at the season. Adam Thielen, who I won't say is washed, but I will not say it was what he was 3 years ago, finished the season with 103 receptions and over 1,000 yards. and for the first half of the season, when I would say he was probably at his healthiest, was pacing to be a top 10 wide receiver. I'm not going to say Deontay Johnson is pacing to be a top 10 wide receiver. I will say Deontay Johnson is vastly better than the current version of Adam Thielen we have.
Well, and Thielen still finished, I think, top 20.
Yeah, I think he was 20 or maybe 24, somewhere in that range. But you add an elite separator and then the offensive line improvements on the interior for Carolina. I'm rather excited and pretty bold that Deontay Johnson's getting back to being the dominant wide receiver in offense. And then you have an offense that fed almost over 100 targets to Jonathan Mingo, who was the least efficient wide receiver on a per target basis last year, that they clearly just need guys in there. And I still think they do need more guys in there. But if their wide receiver room played out this way, I don't think it's crazy to sit down and say 150 plus target season is coming for Deontay just on need alone, and not to mention the skill.
Yeah, and even if they do add, which they probably still will, whether it is you sign another veteran or two, or you invest, like, what are they, pick 37 or like
33?
Yeah, 33. You invest your early second round pick in one of those receivers right around there. Like, they definitely still have the chance to add.
And then they have 38 from the Bryant Burns trade. So
yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah,
they definitely have the capital to do it. But I'll be pretty guns up on Deontay. I know his ADP hasn't really reflected it, but right now I believe, he was going as the wide receiver 43 between Cortland Sutton and Mike Williams, which I think this early in the season is probably the biggest disparity between skill and ADP I could find.
So question for you then, to kind of lead into the Bryce Young part of it that I'll get to a little bit. Is this all about he goes to a situation where he is the clear-cut number one without like a George Pickens, without a Pat Freiermuth taking targets from him? Is this that combined with you think Bryce Young is a better quarterback situation than what's in Pittsburgh? Like which of those carries more weight? Are they pretty equal weight in this? What do you think?
Well, we haven't really had a chance to jump into this, but we haven't even talked about Dave Canales, who led career years out of Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith. And then Mike Evans had almost the best career he's had last year with Baker Mayfield under Dave Canales. I mean, this guy has been a quarterback guru so far in the league. And you combine that, you have very obvious investments in the offense, in their offensive line.
They signed two guards. They paid Robert Hunt from the Dolphins 5 years, $100 million, second largest contract for a guard in NFL history.
Yeah. And you hope that you get better play out of their first round pick from a couple years back, Ike Ekwuononu. And you add those things together. And I mean, I can't help but be bullish on an offense that a lot of people are just not wanting to be a part of because it was so bad last year. But I mean, this is a completely revamped offense. So you put that all together, and I would rather have a guy being thrown to by Bryce Young than a guy being thrown to by Justin Fields or Russell Wilson in an Arthur Smith offense where we know they're going to be run heavy, when Canales has been a lot better at getting his weapons the ball and making his weapons the priority, and then elevating mid-tier quarterback play, which I think former overall number one pick is more than available to do. I mean, him and Baker Mayfield are pretty similar. He's just a little shorter.
Yeah, and I also think he has more. He definitely has more natural arm talent than Baker has ever had. What I was going to say is not to compare. The situation wasn't dysfunctional like Urban in Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence, but this is a little bit similar just from a pure football standpoint to me. Like, you can't. I'm not saying he's going to turn out to be as good as Trevor, even though Trevor's been a little bit of a disappointment, like considering the draft type. But I don't think we could just give up on Bryce Young, a guy who at the very least was one of the best three quarterbacks right there with the other two guys who people really like right now in this most recent draft, after 1 year where he was playing with a terrible offensive line and nobody who could separate at the receiver position. So just adding Deontay Johnson alone would have been a big help, but you have the revamped O-line. You have the offensive coordinator who you trust a lot more than what they had last season. And then you still have the potential to add some more down the stretch here. So I think so far Bryce Young and also Deontay Johnson are two pretty solid winners in free agency.
And the last thing I'll say, because I just think it's important to look at the market, even if it's this early, but because the market is mostly degenerates drafting, he's he's QB 30.
Yeah.
And I mean, some of the names above him, Daniel Jones, Will Levis, Drake May.
Well, just keep in mind, Daniel Jones, like I just read a mock draft today where it was like, don't be surprised if the Giants decide to trade up for a quarterback. Like,
yeah,
he might not even be their starting quarterback this year.
Yeah, and I would not be surprised to see Bryce Young be like a perfectly fine QB2 that you get at the very end of your draft, and he puts up, a few. Because also not talked about is their defense has taken a drastic step back. This team's going to need to score points to be competitive. All of those things combined, I think the fantasy environment's just much more friendly, and that's why I think Deontay and by extension Bryce will be better, and hopefully they add a wide receiver and a running back this offseason and kind of finish out that room.
It would not be a surprise to me if, week 8 next year, Bryce Young is like in the streaming conversation for quarterback, which is a big step up of what he was last season, which was around that QB 30 where he's pressed right now.
Yeah.
All right.
I just think it's a better functional situation.
Yep. All right. Speaking of better functional situations, that is exactly what my guy Josh Jacobs went to, from absolute dysfunction in Vegas to what quietly for a while and then very loudly in the playoffs turned into one of the more promising young offenses in the NFL. And now they have Josh Jacobs, where it's like, I love Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is very, very good. They would have been just fine with him next season. But, they've been trying to kind of have this power run dimension with A.J. Dillon, and I think I've lost track. A.J. Dillon, has he gone back yet? Is he reportedly?
He re-signed pending a physical. I'm assuming the physical went through a couple days ago.
He's back and he'll be involved, but now your best running back can also be the power run dimension, and it doesn't have to be A.J. Dillon all the time in those situations. And what I will say from a dynasty perspective, 4 years, $48 million. If you look at the deal a little closer, it's actually a little bit jarring. They have they can get out of that deal after 1 year, and it would make some salary cap sense if it is a complete bust, or like if he's hurt. But it's probably going to be a 2-year deal is my best guess. So don't get too caught up in the 4 years and like, well, I've got 4 years locked in. Josh Jacobs is this running back. Not quite that far, but still, this is a guy who's going from just an abysmal spot last year. We talked about a lot. I don't think he got worse. I think he was getting tackled in the backfield constantly. QB situation was a joke. And even the year before that, I mean, he had his best year of his career in a year where the Raiders finally decided they'd seen enough of Derek Carr and decided they were going to part ways with him. So, this is a really good running back going to a really good situation, both just from a talent standpoint, a depth chart standpoint, and a scheme standpoint. This is perfect about every way you could look at it for Josh Jacobs.
Yeah. It's probably my favorite running back signing, mostly because of the contract. But when it first happened, it was like, this is going to be very annoying for fantasy owners because
everybody was freaking out about Aaron Jones, only for it to not matter at all.
Big surprise. He's gone. But I mean, this is a Packers team that still has money to spend. They still have picks and not a lot of needs. And then they let David Bakhtiari go, but they still have their left tackle, Rasheed Walker there, who played well. They could easily draft one with their pick this year. They have a lot of flexibility. It's also an offense that's ascending. They had 20 touchdowns by rookies last year, which outpaced some teams in total passing touchdowns altogether, which is insane. Josh Jacobs has more to his receiving game than we've seen in a lot of years, and they're going to utilize it. There's no one else on that roster right now, at least, who is going to be able to take that work away. A.J. Dillon is a dud in the receiving game. That one I'm more confident in.
Yeah.
And the other two guys there have never been big play options. And it's all turning out to be a very good situation. The only hesitancy I have, and this is not like a do not draft statement, there's the reoccurring stat you'll see every year, running backs with over 230 touches. Their following seasons, they fell off. A lot of the names on that list never came back. David Johnson, DeMarco Murray, LaShawn McCoy, those kind of players. The only one to really do it is Derrick Henry. But he's coming from a Raiders offense that made people wonder if Devontae Adams was good last year. So I'm not going to overly be concerned with that. And if he gets knocked down to a 65-70% snap share player, I think that's good for his dynasty value. And this offense is going to score more touchdowns than any Raiders offense he's been a part of.
Yeah, and he just turned 26. So while he may have mileage on him from a pure carry standpoint, which does matter, of course, he's still young. He just turned 26.
Very young.
So it's not like he's going there as a 28, 29-year-old with a ton of miles. So you would hope that maybe you have another 2 years or so of pretty elite production, which is really all you can bank on at running back in Dynasty is just 2-year chunks, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, but I think he is a major winner. And I would say, I don't want to preface too much too early, but I think he's probably my biggest free agent winner from a landing point standpoint, even more so than Swift and Barkley and Henry, even though I think we both have Henry.
Well, I didn't put Henry just because I knew you did. I don't know if I would call Swift a winner.
Neither would I. I think that's a muddy one.
Yeah. Okay, your third one.
I'll just jump into Derrick Henry since we already prefaced him.
Mhm.
This one, it felt like the face cards were out there in December when
they tried to trade for him at the trade deadline, so it felt like it had to happen.
I mean, there's just not a better offense he could be in. Baltimore did lose a guard and a tackle in free agency, so their offensive line is going to need a little revamping. But with Todd Monk in there, I'm confident Derrick Henry is going to see the least stacked box percentage he's seen in the NFL. And just to give you an idea, this is from Stats and Info. Since 2019, Derrick Henry's EPA per play on boxes lighter than 8 players is at 6.8 EPA, which is the same as a lot of quarterbacks passing EPA, which is something you don't often see. Huge win there. There's nobody challenging him for touches on this team. Keaton Mitchell had a late season ACL injury, won't be ready to start the season. Justice Hill will probably be returning. He was all right. Gus Edwards is gone.
I mean, they're probably going to draft a running back unless they decide, well, we'll just bring back J.K. Dobbins and call it a day.
And then you have a team that was 4th in the league in rushing touchdowns. Those rushing touchdowns were frustrating because they were spread out among many running backs. But just to give you an idea of what Derrick Henry might be walking into, of Gus Edwards' 10 touchdowns last year, 8 of them came at the 1-yard line. And you couldn't ask for an easier role for Derrick Henry to be in.
Yeah, and I wish I had the stat in front of me. But basically what you need to know is this. Derrick Henry is awesome at runs outside the tackles. The Ravens run a lot of outside the tackles. So just from a scheme fit, outside of situation fit, from a scheme fit, I think the fit is good too. And I mean, the Lamar is going to take away rushing touchdowns thing has always kind of been overblown. He has not. I think he had like 5 rushing touchdowns last year. He's not been a big rushing touchdown guy like a Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, I mean, Lamar is good in the open field. That especially with Todd Monken, now this team realizes his value is not a QB sneak at the 1-yard line injuring him. And this is an offense that propelled a lesser Gus Edwards this year to RB21 on touchdown equity alone.
Yeah.
And I would say Derrick Henry is worth at least 4 Gus Edwards if we're doing a little value here. So I think top 12 is where he's going to land, and he deserves to be up there and probably going to be one of the best running backs as long as he's healthy.
It's going to be really funny when they get to the playoffs and then give Derrick Henry the ball 5 times this year.
Yeah. Derrick Henry can lose to the Chiefs on a different team. That'll be fun.
That's fair. All right. My next guy, Saquon Barkley. He signs on a 3-year, basically $38 million deal. There's a potential out after 2 years. So probably you're looking at 2 years, most likely, with this deal at least. And, I think the first thing that detractors will throw out there is, well, he's not going to catch the ball like he did in New York in his career. It's like, well, actually, the Eagles threw the ball to their running backs more than the Giants did last year because the Giants were so putrid. There's no Jason Kelce, and you're probably not going to see the Eagles fall down on the 1-yard line as many times as last year. So, Hurts will steal some touchdowns, like I just said earlier, while Lamar probably won't as much. But, I don't think that the pass catching and the touchdown concerns are big enough for me not to say this is a home run win for a guy as talented as Saquon to go to an offense that has made Miles Sanders the RB13 and DeAndre Swift the RB17 in the last 2 seasons. Saquon, while he may be a little inconsistent, he goes for the home run play a little bit more than a guy like Nick Chubb. And so that's why he has blow-up games and some pretty bad games sometimes. But this is still one of the most talented running backs in the league. And I don't think it's crazy to think that this guy could be in the RB 2 to 4 conversation come draft time. Whereas if he goes back to the Giants, is he RB 10, like RB 9? Like he's in that kind of 7 to 11 type of range, probably. And he is just in a much, much, much better spot. It may be too little too late as far as like if you're hoping for rookie year Saquon, it's tough to say if he's too far removed from that to get back to that or not. But I mean, this guy was still like the RB11 last year, and he scored 6 total touchdowns. I think he's going to have more than 6 touchdowns this year. It's RB9 last year, actually. Excuse me. I am very in on Saquon and on this fit with this team.
Yeah, I think it's a definite upgrade. Anywhere other than New York is a definite upgrade. And on the targets perspective, last season, DeAndre Swift in 16 games had 49 targets, and Saquon Barkley had 60. You're splitting hairs there. Saquon Barkley probably deserves more snaps than DeAndre Swift would. You also have an Eagles offense that the last 2 years produced the 5th most rushing yards. DeAndre Swift finished with 5th last year. The year before, Miles Sanders finished with 5th. The loss of Jason Kelce, I mean, it's terrible. You're not going to pretend it's not. I think Howie Roseman's good enough GM that they'll find a good center. Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon looks like he is somebody who could easily land up in Philadelphia and more than do a good job at filling in for Jason Kelce. The only thing, I'm not going to probably put him over RB5, just looking at ADP right now, because I still think there's an outside chance this Eagles offense is heading somewhere south and Nick Sirianni might not be a good coach. But all that to be said, it's still better than New York, and the equity he will get here, I don't think he's going to lose any in that sense. And I'm not really worried about like a tush push stealing a touchdown here and there when he's also getting way better looks in between the 20s because they have AJ Brown and Devontae Smith on the outside.
Yep. And they have an actual quarterback, even though Hurts may have his issues here and there. This guy played on a team that passed for like 10 yards in a game last year.
Yeah.
All right, Dalton, your next guy.
I brought up Zach Moss here. It was exciting on Twitter for like 30 minutes when he signed. And then because Zach Moss is not like Saquon Barkley or Swift or anybody else, you had the fun side of fantasy Twitter that was like, well, did you hear about this guy named Chase Brown?
Yeah.
Cool. Like, thanks for telling me that a guy who couldn't get touches over Joe Mixon is going to take touches away from Zach Moss. This fit couldn't be made better. So last year, 2 teams ran the most shotgun runs, the Bengals and then the Colts. Players with the highest EPA on shotgun runs with over 50 attempts last year, Zach Moss was 3rd in the NFL. He's a very, very good shotgun runner. Let's not forget, he was good enough that Shane Steichen, who's a very good offensive coach, was willing to mix him in and do almost a 50-50 split for several games with Jonathan Taylor till I think he broke his thumb. It's not like Zach Moss is just a retread. He didn't do well in Buffalo, but Devin Singletary didn't either, and then had a career year last year in Houston. Yeah. So there's certainly things wrong with Buffalo's run game. And then on the Chase Brown thing, I just want to talk about this a bit. Chase Brown is like DeAndre Swift with worse vision, where he if he gets in the open field, he's very exciting. But last year
they ran very specific plays for him last year.
Very kind. Last year, this is funny. You set me up so well. This is from Sports Stats and Info. I stole this from The Athletic. Chase Brown on non-designed run plays had an average of negative 2.8 yards per carry. Like, so if they did not design him a play, he was not hitting the right hole. And then the final thing I'll say on Zach Moss, they signed Dwayne Brown today. The Bengals have 2 very, very large men at tackle in Orlando Brown and Dwayne Brown, and they are going to be able to maul teams up front and get him positive yards. I'm not going crazy and putting him like top 12, but I think he's easily a top 17 to 18 running back.
I actually looked at Fantasy Pros because I was curious what his rank was today. RB 36, I think, was his rank.
Yeah.
It wasn't ADP. It was just whatever ranking was on Fantasy Pros.
Yeah, and that puts him behind guys like, I think he's better than Zamir White. I mean, probably in a better situation than Joe Mixon, who left. Probably in a better situation than James Conner, who I'm still worried about age. Brian Robinson. Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, Dameon Pierce is better than Chase Brown. If you're just talking about guys behind those two running backs. And, you mentioned the stat for Chase Brown on the runs. And, they are going to scheme up plays for him this year because he is talented in the open field. They ran a ton of screen passes for him last year. Now, part of that is because they didn't have Joe Burrow at that point. So it was like, how can we manufacture yards? But they'll still do that from time to time. He's still going to get touches. Like, I don't expect Zach Moss to be an 80% touch guy. Yeah. But I think Chase Brown is going to be a 8 touch, and you hope for explosive plays, whereas I think Zach Moss is more in that 15 to 17 touch. He can run duo. He can run out of shotgun. He can do the dirty work as a running back. I like the fit. I like the situation. And it's just a big win for Zach Moss, who was a guy that, like, you knew he'd go somewhere and have a role. What you didn't know is if he'd go somewhere and be the clear-cut starter. And I think he's the clear-cut starter for a very good team, if healthy, obviously.
Yeah. And I think he's going to be a good pick in, like, the quote-unquote RB dead zone, like into the 3rd, 4th, 5th. I think that's probably where he lands, and I think those are good picks. I think Chase Brown's a good, like, last pick of your draft if you're going 0 RB in a best ball. But, I mean, a 60% snap share in this Bengals offense is more than enough for Zach Moss to be a value and a winner of this free agency period.
Yep. All right, my last one, I just cheated and made it 2, was Hollywood Brown and Patrick Mahomes. But, I mean, like, there's not a ton to say that the basic mind can't put together here. You have the best quarterback in the NFL. You had a wide receiver deficient team. You add a receiver who is very fast. He can be a deep threat, but he can do more than just the deep stuff. He can do the out routes over the middle. He's good against zone. He is good enough against man to be a meaningful upgrade for what the Chiefs had for everybody outside of Rice last year. Like, I think I'm not sure what I think as of the end of the season last year, it was a real argument as to who's better, Hollywood or Rashee Rice. We'll see what it is next year. But right now, it's kind of a 1A, 1B in the receiver room with those two right now. And, I mean, obviously Hollywood was going to be fine wherever he went. But, I mean, let's be real. He's been on run-first offenses his entire career, basically. The Cardinals, they put up some numbers sometimes, but mostly were not a functional offense. And they had Kyler Murray obviously injured for a large chunk of time while he was there. The Ravens were a mega run-first offense when he was there. Like, has he ever had the upside that he has heading into this season on this offense? I think the answer to that is no. Like, Kelsey, I think is going to continue to see those snaps go a little bit lower. Now, is he still tight end 2 or 3? Yeah, for sure. He's still a top 2 or 3 tight end at least. But I think he's going to see a decrease in workload as he should. We saw what a fresh Travis Kelsey can do down the stretch. And I just think for Mahomes, just giving him a real receiver room again takes him from like the QB 3, 4, 5 conversation to he should be right there with Josh Allen as the number 1 overall quarterback.
Yeah, just to add some stats, what you're saying, because I think we feel the same way. In his career, he played with Baltimore, had 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns last year in the 31st ranked passing offense. Going to Arizona, they ranked 16th and 18th. Both times he was there. Over the last 5 years, the Chiefs have been first every year in passing offense. So it's an immediate upgrade there. Then if you just split the time in Arizona he had with Kyler Murray, he's legitimately producing like a low-end wide receiver 1. In 8 games, he had 95 yards and 6 touchdowns with Kyler Murray. And then the last thing that I don't think has been stated enough, over his entire career, Hollywood Brown has 23 drops. That's over the course of 5 years.
I think the Chiefs had 83 last year as a team.
Yes, the Chiefs had more than that alone in one season. I have seen a lot of people tweeting out the EPA per play on targets, and it's the same for Hollywood's career and Justin Watson and MVS last year. I'm going to go ahead and tell you to throw those stats out the window. Uh, it's just not the same. And then the last thing on this, they're both winners. If you're downgrading Rashee Rice in your rankings because of this, I question the process and your outcomes in your process.
Yeah, I
because
mean, we
that's a very
said
good call.
what did we say a month ago? We said that he should be in that kind of mid wide receiver 2, and you should in your mind be thinking they are going to add somebody. Guess what?
Yes.
They add somebody, and there could they could sign a cheap vet. They could draft somebody. They could do both of those things. Like I think if you had Rashee Rice as wide receiver 10, you were fooling yourself.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think it's perfectly fine for him to be right there in like the wide receiver 15 through 20 conversation. And that's a perfectly good value.
Yep. All right. Losers.
I have one more winner.
One more winner. Okay, sorry. One more winner.
This one we can go fast on. It's Caleb Williams in so many ways.
Mhm.
This will be the best spot a number 1 draft pick has landed in. I mean, since I've been watching football, I think maybe you can argue Mahomes, but even he's sat a year. You have Keenan Allen.
Well, you're talking first round pick or number 1 overall pick?
Oh, sorry, number 1 overall pick. But
yeah,
even
like Trevor Lawrence, abysmal. I don't know, just like thinking back to Bryce Young, abysmal.
Baker, abysmal.
Yeah, Baker. It is easily in recent history the best.
And you have, I mean, Keenan Allen's the most friendly wide receiver to a quarterback because of how open he gets. DJ Moore and Keenan Allen also just fit really well together. You have a guy who can create space in the middle and a guy who can get down deep.
And they still have the 8th overall pick.
Yeah. They have Gerald Everett. They improved their offensive line. And then they have DeAndre Swift. I still have questions about this offensive coaching group in Chicago, but I think Caleb Williams has been set up for success so well. And I'm no longer questioning people who have him right outside the top 12 quarterbacks, like 14, 15. I can understand that. And I think it's okay to be bullish on him at this point because Chicago could not have done a better job to try to set themselves up.
And they've improved the offensive line as well. And, unfortunately, that does lead me into my first loser, which is Keenan Allen. And while from a real football perspective, I think this is good for Keenan Allen, good for the Bears, good for Caleb Williams. I think from a fantasy perspective, this is not great for Keenan Allen to go from Justin Herbert's 1 to Caleb Williams number 2 with potentially like Rome Odunze is still being mocked to the Bears in every mock draft I see. Like they could still draft a top 10 receiver in this draft. Not to say that he immediately bumped down the wide receiver 3, but like as a player, Keenan Allen still good, not quite as good as in years past. Looking at his reception perception as of late, the numbers against the zone were very good, best since 2019 actually. But against man coverage, he is like nowhere close to peak Keenan Allen, and that just means this is a guy who is transitioning from a little more downfield stuff to he is a purely short game, get open against zone type of guy at this point, as opposed to separating against man and zone even down the field, which like perfectly fine for decent fantasy success, perfectly fine for this offense, which will be great for Caleb Williams, like you said, and even perfectly fine like as a fit with DJ Moore, who is that number 1 X receiver. But this is a guy who was a wide receiver 6 last season, and you're just not going to have anywhere close to that ceiling because the target volume isn't there. Now, I do think part of the Chargers' ceiling issue, lack of ceiling, was because Keenan Allen was getting that volume and was the wide receiver 6. But yeah, I mean, and then you just think about rookie quarterbacks and their receivers. Obviously, Caleb Williams, we talked about it, is walking into a great spot. This is a generational prospect from everything people say, but you look at I think it was since 2013. Yep, 2013 to 2022. I pulled this stat from the Fantasy Index. So 54 wide receivers, the top 2 for each of these 27 rookie quarterbacks. 35 of those 54 finished outside of the top 36. 7 of them were top 24 wide receivers. Now, You look at last year, and this is all PPR. You look at last year, 2 finished top 24, may have been 3 if Tank Dell didn't get hurt. 1 was way outside in DJ Chark. And there's obviously a lot of context missing in that quality of quarterback, quality of receivers, but just blanket statement. You would rather have a good veteran quarterback than a rookie quarterback for fantasy. So this is definitely a ding for Justin Fields. He's my next loser. This is definitely a ding for Keenan Allen in my eyes from a fantasy perspective, even though from a real football perspective, this is a good transition for his career, I think.
Yeah, and kind of add to your stat there, I did a similar look back on that. Going back to 2008, there has not been a single rookie quarterback to hold 2 wide receivers in the top 20 over the course of a season. I think CJ Stroud was on pace to probably do that with Nico and Tank Dell last year.
Yeah, Nico finished as wide receiver 18. I think Tank Dell was like wide receiver 26 or something like that. So I think he would have gotten it. Now, does Nico get it if Tank, but it would have been close.
Yes, but then you get into the conversation, you're asking Caleb Williams to do what CJ Stroud did, which is have one of the best rookie quarterback seasons, and you're asking him to have an offensive guru like Slowick in Houston run him plays well. And then this is an aside for a much later conversation. The Texans saw the most single high coverages of any NFL team in the last 5 years last year, which is weird considering the transition to cover 2 defenses. And another thing that with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, I don't think people are going to be very friendly about giving those looks to Caleb Williams.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. Not to that extent, at least. All right, Dalton, your first loser.
You said him already. This one, I feel vindicated after last offseason. It's Justin Fields.
Yeah.
I mean, it couldn't be worse. You had people ranking him as a top 4 quarterback.
Yeah.
Like, let's just not forget that.
Yep.
And this is a take that we'll probably talk more about as the season goes on, but we're swinging way too wildly on the Konami code quarterbacks breaking fantasy and not just evaluating passers for what they are. And Justin Fields is just a passer who needs work. And unfortunately for him, he is going to a team with an offense that without Deontay does not have it's a worse receiving room than he had last year. His it wasn't good.
And not even just that. I mean, the reporting that's out there right now, as of literally yesterday, this came out when I was looking, the Steelers are apparently saying that Russell Wilson is going to still be the starting quarterback, and this is not going to be a competition.
Yeah,
how true that is, I don't know, but that is the reporting right now.
So we will see how they feel in October.
But he's not probably going to start the year as the starter. Obvious loss there. Then you have a guy coming up on which these two things don't really make sense to me. You have a guy coming up on his 5th-year option. You would think you might just want to throw him in there and see what you got. But anyway, he's coming up on his 5th-year option, going to be around $26 million. Schefter is already reporting that is unlikely. Now, could he have a new deal in the works? I mean, yeah, he could get a new deal at some point, even if that is declined. But like, you're a quarterback who you're not projected to be the starter to start the season. You're going to get your 5th-year option declined. And more than that, what do you get traded for? A conditional 6th? Like, every team
4th if he plays 51% of the snaps.
Maybe that's why he's not the starter to start the season. Every team in the NFL had the chance to add this guy for cheap, and basically all of them said, we're good. That is terrifying.
Yeah. Well, I pulled this stat because at first I liked Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh with Kenny Pickett, Deontay Johnson. I don't like him anymore in Pittsburgh because the fit couldn't be worse. Over the last 3 years in Atlanta, the lowest rate of targets over the middle of the field was Desmond Ridder 2 years ago, where he targeted over the field 9.8% of his passes. Russell Wilson's highest target rate over the last 6 years was 5.2%, and Justin Fields over the same span of his career is 6.8%.
So it's also funny these are the 2 quarterbacks who had the longest time to throw last year. Yes. Good luck, Steelers O-line.
Yeah, it could not be a worse fit at this point. And then you lose your best middle, like intermediate threat in Deontay Johnson, and now you have a sideline throw quarterback in Russell Wilson and George Pickens with an offensive-minded coach who doesn't like to do that. It just couldn't be worse.
It's so funny with Pickens because when they bring in Arthur Smith, everyone's like, okay, we might finally get to see, can this guy do more over the field with an expanded route tree? Oh, great. Here's Russell Wilson. Here's Justin Fields. Okay, Pickens, you're back to your same route tree. Run straight.
Yes.
Maybe run a
pass. And it's not even
run
a fault this time. It's his quarterback's fault. So, I mean, Diana Rossini on The Athletic did point out, it sounds like they want to use Justin Fields in packages, which is even more frustrating for both these players.
Yeah, I saw on ESPN there on a show today that one of the topics was, can a 2-quarterback system work in Pittsburgh? Yes,
we got to take
no,
some
guys.
situation.
It's always Fields. No. You don't have to ask. It is always no.
Yeah. So I think we both have him as a loser here. I mean, they're going to go 9-8 and make the playoffs and lose in the first round again or something. That's just what the Steelers do.
Not the division stays healthy this time.
Yeah. So couldn't be worse for Justin Fields. And the last thing, I mean, I know the Bears came out and said they didn't do better trade packages because they wanted to do right by him.
Yeah, but what are you doing?
Well, if doing right by him is giving him a backup job in Pittsburgh,
that's where he claims he will. That's where the reporting says he wanted to go. I mean, but yeah. How about you just wait till after the draft and during camp? So there's going to be a team that someone gets hurt, or I know you and I talked about. We just can't really see him as a Sean Payton quarterback. But who's the Broncos starting quarterback going to be if they don't trade up for JJ McCarthy?
Jarrett Stidham.
Who's the Vikings starting quarterback going to be if they don't trade up for JJ McCarthy?
Sam Darnold.
One of those two teams would probably want to trade for another quarterback if they don't get JJ McCarthy. Just a hunch.
The last thing I'll say. Kenny Pickett got traded for more to the Eagles when Justin Fields is a better fit to take over a Jalen Hurts role if Jalen Hurts were to get injured. I mean, you cannot
things got so bad for his value that Chiefs Twitter was like, what do we think about trading for Justin Fields as a backup?
I mean, he went basically for the same thing Trey Lance went for.
He went for less. Trey Lance went for more.
Oh, I did not.
Unless that pick turns into a fourth.
Unless it turns into the kicker. I mean, if you own him in Dynasty, you're probably just sitting with him. It's just like with Trey Lance when he got traded to the Cowboys. You're just like, well, I'm stuck here. But I mean, he's not getting drafted, obviously, in any redraft league.
I'm trying to find what Trey Lance was traded for. The fact check that. All right, who's your next loser?
Justin Herbert. I mean, he loses everybody.
Made even worse today by Mike Williams officially not going.
Yes. So he's lost Mike Williams. He's lost Keenan Allen. Obviously, his two biggest weapons. He lost Gerald Everett, who he often targeted because he had no other weapons. He lost Austin Eckler, who he also targeted because he had no other weapons. He's now with Josh Palmer. And Harbaugh has made it incredibly clear this free agency that he wants to establish it in the hiring of Greg Roman and the signing of Gus Edwards. I hope you're ready to speak 20 pass attempts a game, because
I don't think I'm going that far, but I have concerns with the receiver room right now.
Yes. I mean, it's Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston, and I cannot name you their wide receiver 3. I think it's Simi Feheko, I'm guessing. And then they signed Will Dissly, who is a wide blocking tight end. So and I also think the Chargers are probably going to trade back in the draft to take a lineman. Based on most of the mocks I'm looking at, there's a high possibility of that happening. And the fantasy bros really need Malik Neighbors to go to the Chargers. But it's a better coaching staff. It is not a better environment for Justin Herbert. And they made a very clear consideration to keep both of their defensive keys in Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa instead of their two offensive keys in Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. And I know they approached Keenan Allen about a pay cut, and he said no, which I love him for doing that press conference. But he will be outside my top 12 wide receivers to start the season unless they draft Malik Neighbors and then back-to-back take I don't know, even Lad McConkey at this point. Like they would need 2 wide receivers early in the draft, and I don't see this front office doing that with the way they've led free agency.
Yeah, so I had Herbert as a loser. We just covered that. Trevor Lawrence in the same vein, not as drastic, but when you go from Calvin Ridley to Gabe Davis, I think that is a pretty big downgrade. The Cowboys trade a 4th-round pick, 2024 4th-round pick. So nothing conditional about it, just straight up 4th-round pick for Trey Lance. Just throw that back out there. All right, my next loser here. We'll go through these last couple pretty quick. Jordan Addison. I think you're going to see a lot of people talk about the big 3 of Hawkinson, Jefferson, and Addison all being losers. And yeah, obviously it hurts all of them that Kirk Cousins is gone, and it's either a rookie or Sam Darnold at quarterback. But like Hawkinson, I just have no idea what to make of his value right now. He got hurt so late in the season. I don't know when he'll be back. His value is pretty low. Like I'm just kind of putting that to the side for right now. And then JJ, like, okay, if you're going to move him from wide receiver 1 to wide receiver 3, okay. like, yeah, his value is downgrade a little bit, but like no one is doing anything drastic with his value. And I just think in situations like these where you have a truly elite player and then a pretty good, but I don't want to say flawed, but just a player with a very specific skill set like Jordan Addison, especially a guy who is being a deep threat is one of his better skills, I'd say. I think he's going to get hurt a lot more, relatively speaking, than a guy like JJ when you have this kind of quarterback downgrade. He's just such a boom bust player already. I think the QB downgrade is a big time concern for him this year.
Yeah, and the rumors are obviously the Vikings are trying to trade up with the acquiring of the 23rd pick. It's either JJ McCarthy. I've also seen a lot of rumors it's Drake May because McCown was Drake May's quarterback's coach in high school. And I mean, we're deep in the rumor mill. We're really bored. But either of those guys, again, going back to the conversation earlier with Keenan Allen, to support 2 top 24 wide receivers as a rookie quarterback is next to unheard of. Kevin O'Connell's a great coach. But with a rookie quarterback, you're probably going to sit him in there and say, hey, there's a guy over there. His name's Justin Jefferson. You're going to look at him and you're going to throw to him, and you're not going to bother reading the field your first year. Like that's just going to be the coaching mindset in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Your next one.
This one can be quick. Ty Chandler. He's discount Aaron Jones in Minnesota. His best aspiration was to be like Aaron Jones. He is not like Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones was still good to end the season last year. He has an injury problem, but he's drastically better than Ty Chandler. Ty Chandler will be a 30% snap player. Would he look like he could have been a winner if they hadn't signed anybody? That's about it.
Yeah, and just the offense as a whole is being downgraded too because no Kirk Cousins. My last one, this one might be a little bit spicy because I think people are going to be debating Tony Pollard versus Tajay Spears all offseason. But let's just put that debate aside for a second and say Tony Pollard here, just because this is an obvious step back in offense and a step up in competition on the depth chart. This is not Rico Dowdle sharing touches with Tony Pollard this year. This is a guy, Tajay Spears, who we were all ready to put as the RB13 if they didn't bring anybody in major. Now, will Spears get a downgrade a little bit? Yeah. Will he be ranked behind Tony Pollard by most people? Yeah. Even the most positive Tony Pollard people aren't going to have Tajay Spears that far behind, and that is not the situation that Tony Pollard is leaving. Never mind that you're going from the Dak Prescott Cowboys to the Will Levis Titans for Tony Pollard. And, you know, maybe we get a more efficient Tony Pollard because he doesn't have to play that every down role anymore. But I have a hard time. Like at no point last year, even when he started playing better, I think like week 11 is where everyone does
that's the split.
The split with Tony Pollard. Even when he was playing better, I just never saw like 2022 Tony Pollard in 2023. And I'm just skeptical that we're going to get that guy back. And if we get a smaller role, you know, maybe he'll be more efficient, but I think the fantasy production is probably at worst staying the same, and at best staying the same, at worst going down a little bit. And, you know, Pollard was one of 6 running backs out of 49 guys to have a 30% rush share on goal line carries, or score a touchdown on 30% of the goal line carries who had 10 or more carries, inside the 5. He was the most fantasy PPR points below expected per Ian Hartitz. It's like, it's very possible Tajay Spears is just better. Even if he's not, he's close to as good. And I just don't like that, plus a worse offense for a descending player in Tony Pollard.
Yeah, I am excited about Brian Callahan bringing his dad to come coach the offensive line. I will say that about the Titans. I'll flag plant now. I'll flag plant all season. I think Tajay Spears is just a better player than Tony Pollard ever was. And I aspirationally for Tony Pollard, I think he could have like a Gio Bernard Bengals season, which is not bad. I mean, Gio Bernard had top 24 seasons, but where he's used in relief of the running back, where he's a pass catcher, he's a situational third down player. But then you need Will Levis to take a step forward, which maybe with the addition of Calvin Ridley, he can do that. But I'm not overly optimistic on this Titans offense being anything to call home about. So yeah, I mean, Tony Pollard, big time loser.
Yeah, and we don't even know what the goal line split will look like, because I mean, Spears never had a legit chance to have the goal line roll last year because it's Derrick freaking Henry he's with. Like, he could end up being a better goal line back than Tony Pollard, who sometimes looked blind and sometimes looked like he was stuck in molasses on the goal line last year.
Yes, and for Tajay Spears to be the first running back in Titans history to take actual meaningful snaps away from Derrick Henry is probably something a lot more people should think of. And Rand Carthon, the GM of the Titans, has already spoke glowingly about it. I think Tony Pollard is just, even now, even 2 years ago, Tony Pollard is not better than what I think Tajay Spears is now. It's just,
agreed. Better athlete, not as good of a running back. Okay, Dalton, are we down to your last one?
We are. This is another one we can go quick through. It's not been talked about a lot, but the Miami Dolphins, and specifically Tua and their offense, I think there might be like a little bit of time for a panic meter here. They were one of the people who discovered the cap was in fact real, and they had to let go of 2 of their offensive linemen. One of them we mentioned earlier, he went to the Panthers. That would be Williams, who signed a massive deal. Mm-hmm. He's a great guard. This is from my boy Braden Thorne. Last year, Williams ran the most swing plays of any guard in the NFL, which is very critical to this Miami offense because they like their motion and they like moving their guards in gaps. That also is very confusing and harder to do as a guard. So that alone is a major loss. Then they lose their center, who's still on the free agent market. There's always a chance they bring him back. But you're losing 2 interior offensive linemen, and Tua is a quarterback who has never performed well under pressure. Last season alone, he had his best pass protection, but when he was pressured, he was graded as the 22nd quarterback in EPA per play. So you're taking steps back and you're asking, I think, for their coaching staff to somehow work magic again this year with a limited quarterback and now a limited offensive line, and what I will still say is a limited run game. That now
I was going to say, on top of that, I think you're also asking for a unsustainable year from the running back room to repeat or be close to as good. I like H.N. He had like all-time historic stretch last year. Mostert scored more touchdowns last year than he had for the rest of his career combined. He stayed very healthy for most of last season. And obviously they can still draft somebody, but through free agency so far, not feeling super great about what's happened on that offense.
Tyreek Hill is going to Tyreek Hill. Everyone else, I'm going to be rather not optimistic about unless they make some moves that are beneficial. I mean, they have to draft a guard or a tackle in their first pick of this draft for me to even reconsider it. Maybe the guy out of Duke, maybe the guy out of Oregon. Those are 2 players. But no, major losses in free agency, and to not make any moves to get better when they weren't their best selves in the second half of last season is already alarming. And then to lose 2 critical offensive linemen, and then to be relying on a left tackle who has not been healthy for most of the year, most of his career, I am going to probably be down on all of the shares on Miami players that are not named Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll still, like, Waddle is still so good too that it's hard to downgrade him too much. he's better. Like, obviously, it's not like the Vikings, so they're not losing their quarterback. But even if they were, he is a better player than Jordan Addison. So he is above the fray as far as seeing the like traditional two be really hurt, but also he's obviously not the number one there. So that is definitely a factor. Side note, it will be interesting to see what happens between Tua and the Dolphins this offseason, because we're kind of down to it as far as are we going to pay this man, make him our quarterback, or are we not?
Yeah, talk about a team that Justin Fields could have gone to.
Yeah,
I mean,
seriously.
honestly. But anyways, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, that is going to do it for episode 137 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Half Point Per Podcast. Link to all those things in the show notes, as always. We are not back weekly yet at this point. Still a ways off of that. We'll probably have one, maybe two shows before the draft, a show after the draft, and then a little break again after that. But we'll be back in the next couple of weeks. We'll talk some draft prospects before and after the draft. Thank you so much again for listening. The show is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, etc. We will talk to you all again very soon.